A scream shattered the morning calm in Calne, Wiltshire. Matthew Gould stood frozen, the kitchen floor before him painted red, his daughter Ellie lying lifeless in a pool of blood. The morning of May 3, 2019, in Calne, Wiltshire, was supposed to be just another day. The sun rose over the peaceful town, casting light on the homes nestled in this quiet corner of England. Matthew Gould, a father with a routine visit to his daughter's home, walked through the door expecting to see Ellie, his 17-year-old daughter, getting ready for school. However, what he found inside was beyond comprehension. The kitchen, usually the heart of Ellie's home, was now a scene of horror. Ellie lay on the floor, her body surrounded by blood, the stark contrast of red against the tiles telling a grim story. Multiple stab wounds marred her body, evidence of a violent attack that had taken her life. The warmth of the home was replaced by the chilling air of tragedy. Matthew's shock was palpable, his world collapsing in that moment. His immediate reaction was to call for help, his voice shaking with grief and disbelief. Soon, the sound of sirens pierced the quiet morning, the police arriving to confront a nightmare they hoped never to see. Upon entering the house, the police officers' expressions turned grave. They confirmed what Matthew had already known in his heart: Ellie was dead. There was no time for mourning, action was needed. They moved with a purpose, securing the area, noting the blood patterns, the position of the body, every detail that might speak to what had happened. The kitchen, once a place of family meals and laughter, was now a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape, marked by the presence of officers in forensic suits. The investigation into Ellie Gould's murder started with urgency. Every piece of evidence was critical, every second counted. Photographs were taken, notes scribbled, and the initial assessment began. Who could have done this? Why? Questions swarmed in the minds of those present, but answers were elusive, buried under the weight of the crime. Neighbors, oblivious to the chaos until now, began to gather outside, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. The news of Ellie's death spread like wildfire, turning a normal day in Calne into one of mourning and shock. The once quiet street was now the epicenter of an investigation, with every detail from the last hours of Ellie's life under scrutiny. The officers knew this was just the beginning. The journey to find justice for Ellie would be long, filled with painstaking work, but it was a journey they were committed to. The community of Calne, and beyond, would demand answers, and the police were determined to provide them. The discovery of Ellie's body marked not just the end of her life, but the start of an intense search for truth and justice in the heart of their community. Ellie Gould was more than just a typical teenager. She was a beacon of light in the community of Calne. As a Year 12 student at Hardenhuis School, she had carved out a reputation for herself, not just academically but through her passion for horses. Her equestrian skills were well known, and she harbored a dream that many saw as both noble and fitting: to join the mounted police. Her love for animals, particularly horses, was evident to anyone who knew her, often seen at local stables, her presence a source of joy and encouragement. Her character was defined by kindness. Friends would reminisce about her infectious laugh, a sound that seemed to brighten even the gloomiest of days. She was the person who always had a kind word, an encouraging smile, making everyone feel seen and valued. Her teachers spoke of her with admiration, noting her dedication not only to her studies but to her future. Ellie was not just passing through school, She was actively shaping her path, with clear goals and an ambition that inspired those around her. Ellie was popular, not for seeking attention, but for being genuinely loved. Her potential was boundless, her life a canvas of promise. She was involved in school activities, always eager to help, to learn, to grow. Her loss was not just a tragedy for her family, but for everyone who had the privilege of knowing her, leaving a void where once there was light, laughter, and endless potential. On May 2, 2019, Ellie Gould made a pivotal decision that would unknowingly set the stage for the events to follow. She decided to end her relationship with Thomas Griffiths, a relationship that had only spanned 3 months. Ellie's priority was clear. She wanted to devote her time and energy to her academic pursuits. This decision was not made lightly, and she confided in her close friends, seeking their understanding and support for her choice to focus on her future. However, Thomas did not receive the news with the same level of acceptance. Witnesses who were around during this conversation observed his visible displeasure. His mood shifted noticeably, a cloud of discontent settling over him. His reaction was one of anger, his face a mask of frustration that contrasted sharply with Ellie's calm resolve. Friends later recounted how Thomas's demeanor changed. He was not just upset but deeply affected by the breakup, a fact that would, in hindsight, be seen as a dark omen. This moment of separation, seen then as just another teenage breakup, would later be re-evaluated in light of the tragedy that followed. The emotional turmoil Thomas exhibited was a prelude to the violence he would unleash, a sign that was missed until it was too late. Ellie Gould and Thomas Griffiths crossed paths at Hardenwish School, the spark of their relationship igniting in January 2019. It was the kind of romance that defined teenage years, marked by the excitement of school events, the comfort of shared classes, and the simple joys of young love. They were seen walking together in the corridors, laughing at shared inside jokes, and spending time together in the ways teenagers do, with a mix of innocence and the thrill of discovery. Their relationship seemed to fit into the landscape of high school life, unremarkable in its normalcy yet special to them. They attended dances, supported each other in school projects, and shared the mundane yet beautiful moments of adolescent life. But this budding romance was not to last. The end came suddenly, without the fanfare of its beginning. The last moments of their relationship were overshadowed by what would soon become a source of immense sorrow, a stark contrast to the light-hearted days that had preceded it. The day began like any other at Hardenwish School, with students moving through the halls, classes in session, and the usual buzz of teenage life. However, for Thomas Griffiths, this day was different. He left school early, claiming he felt ill, an excuse that would later be scrutinized. Once home, he changed into black clothing, a deliberate choice that spoke volumes about his intentions. The shift in his attire mirrored a shift in his psyche, from the everyday to something dark and foreboding. Driving to Ellie Gould's house, Thomas arrived at what should have been a sanctuary for her. Ellie was alone, her home a place where she should have felt safe. But on this day, it became the scene of her tragedy. Thomas entered, and in the kitchen, where family meals were shared, and laughter once echoed, he selected a knife from the drawer. What followed was an act of violence that would shatter the peace of Calne. With no witnesses to intervene, Thomas attacked Ellie. She was stabbed at least 13 times, the brutality of the assault leaving no doubt about his intent. Each stab was a testament to a rage or despair, or perhaps a mix of both, that had consumed him. After the attack, with Ellie lying lifeless on the kitchen floor, Thomas set about a grim task. He tried to manipulate the scene, attempting to stage it as if Ellie had taken her own life. He placed the knife in her now still hand, a cruel effort to deceive, to shift the narrative from murder to suicide. This act of deceit was not just an attempt to escape accountability, but also to rewrite the story of what had happened in that kitchen. However, the physical evidence would soon contradict this false narrative. The blood patterns, the nature of the wounds, all spoke of a struggle, of violence inflicted upon her, not by her own hand. The attempt to stage the scene was marred by the undeniable signs of a brutal attack. Thomas's actions that day, from leaving school under false pretenses to the calculated choice of clothing, the drive to Ellie's, the attack, and the attempted cover-up, painted a picture of premeditation. This was not a spontaneous act, but one planned, at least in the moments leading up to it, with chilling intent. The truth of what transpired, the cold reality of Ellie's murder, would soon be pieced together by investigators, revealing a tale far removed from the one Thomas tried to craft. As the news of Ellie's death spread, the community of Calne was left in shock, grappling with the horror of what had occurred. The kitchen, once a place of warmth, was now a crime scene, a stark reminder of the violence that had invaded their quiet town. The day of May 3, 2019, would be remembered not just for the loss of a bright young life, but for the sinister actions that led to it. The moment police officers entered Ellie Gould's home and confirmed her death, the machinery of justice sprang into action. The investigation into who could have committed such a heinous act began with urgency, driven by both the need for swift justice and the shock of such violence in a seemingly peaceful town. The focus almost immediately narrowed down to Thomas Griffiths, Ellie's ex-boyfriend. The breakup the day before, combined with Thomas's sudden departure from school under the guise of illness, painted him as a prime suspect from the outset. The investigation was thorough, leaving no stone unturned in the quest for truth. One of the first pieces of evidence came from CCTV footage, a silent witness to the events of that fateful day. Cameras on a local bus captured Thomas, dressed in black, moving away from school, his path unmistakably heading towards Ellie's house. This visual evidence was compelling, showing not just his direction but also his attire, which starkly contrasted with his normal school day appearance, suggesting premeditation. Forensic teams worked meticulously at the crime scene, collecting evidence that would later prove crucial. Blood patterns in the kitchen, the type of wounds inflicted, all pointed towards a violent struggle rather than suicide, contradicting any narrative Thomas might have attempted to stage. But it was the discovery of blood-stained items near Thomas's home that solidified his connection to the crime. These items, including clothing that matched what he was seen wearing on the CCTV, were clear links to the scene of the crime, irrefutable in their implication. The police moved quickly, their investigation leading to Thomas's arrest on the same day as the murder. He was taken into custody, where he initially tried to provide a false alibi, claiming to have been elsewhere. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and his story did not hold up under scrutiny. The CCTV footage, the physical evidence from both the crime scene and his home, created a narrative that was hard to deny. Faced with this mountain of evidence, Thomas eventually confessed to the murder, though his initial attempt to deceive investigators would be noted and used to illustrate his intent in later legal proceedings. The arrest and confession were just the beginning. The police continued their work, ensuring every aspect of the case was documented, every piece of evidence catalogued. They interviewed friends, classmates, and teachers, piecing together the events leading up to the murder. They learned about the breakup, Thomas's reaction to it, and his behavior in the days prior, collecting statements that would paint a picture of a young man dealing poorly with rejection. The community watched closely, the shock of the crime giving way to a collective demand for justice. The investigation into Ellie Gould's murder was not just about solving a crime. It was about understanding how such violence could erupt from what seemed like normal teenage life. The meticulous nature of the investigation, from the gathering of physical evidence to the detailed timeline of Thomas's movements, ensured that the case against him was robust, leaving no room for doubt about his culpability. This thorough investigation was a testament to the dedication of the police to find the truth, to honor Ellie's memory through justice. It was a somber reminder of the complexities behind what might appear as simple human interactions, and the devastating consequences when those interactions go horrifically wrong. In the solemn atmosphere of the courtroom in August 2019, Thomas Griffiths stood before the law, the reality of his actions laid bare. He pleaded guilty to the murder of Ellie Gould, a decision that spared her family from reliving the horror through a trial. However, the courtroom was not silent. It was filled with the weight of the testimonies, the evidence, and the impact statements that painted a comprehensive picture of the tragedy. The prosecution methodically laid out the evidence. CCTV footage, once again shown, confirmed Thomas's movements on the day of the murder, dressed in black, his journey to Ellie's home clear and deliberate. Forensic evidence was presented, detailing how Thomas had not only attacked Ellie but had also inflicted defensive wounds upon himself in an attempt to mislead the investigation. The blood on his clothing was Ellie's, a grim testament to the violence he had committed. Witnesses, including friends and classmates, provided insights into the relationship, the breakup, and Thomas's reaction. Their testimonies revealed a young man who was visibly shaken by the end of the relationship, his mood deteriorating, which the prosecution argued was a precursor to his violent act. They painted a picture of premeditation, not of a spontaneous act, but one fueled by rejection, anger, or despair. The courtroom heard how Thomas had tried to manipulate the crime scene, staging it to look like Ellie had taken her own life, an act of deceit that was quickly unraveled by forensic analysis. The prosecution hammered on this point, emphasizing Thomas's attempt to escape responsibility for his actions, further illustrating his culpability and the calculated nature of the crime. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom was a place of quiet intensity, with Ellie's family present, their grief palpable, seeking some measure of justice for their loss. The defense, while acknowledging Thomas's guilt, attempted to mitigate the narrative by highlighting his youth, suggesting that his actions were those of an immature mind, unable to process rejection in a healthy manner. Yet, this argument did little to sway the atmosphere. The crime's brutality was undeniable. The sentencing in November 2019 came after these revelations. Thomas Griffiths was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 12 years and 6 months before being eligible for parole. This sentence was a moment of complex emotions for all involved. For Ellie's family, it was justice served, yet at an unfathomable cost. For the community and those following the case, the sentence sparked a significant debate. Many felt it was too lenient, given the viciousness of the attack, the premeditation, and Thomas's attempt to cover his tracks. Critics argued that the minimum term did not reflect the gravity of the crime or provide enough deterrent or retribution. The debate centered on several points: Thomas's age at the time of the crime, the nature of youth sentencing, and the adequacy of the legal system in dealing with such cases. Some argued for stricter penalties to reflect the severity of domestic violence, especially when committed by teenagers. Others pondered the implications of long sentences on young offenders' rehabilitation and future societal reintegration. This trial and sentencing were not just about one case but spoke to broader issues of justice, youth violence, and the aftermath of domestic homicide. The courtroom proceedings had laid bare not only the details of Ellie Gould's murder, but also the societal and legal questions that such a tragedy provokes. While Thomas Griffiths was now behind bars, the conversation he initiated through his actions would continue, influencing discussions on law, punishment, and prevention in the years to come. The murder of Ellie Gould was not an isolated event. Its repercussions echoed through the community of Calne and beyond, into the halls of Hardenwish School where Ellie's laughter had once been a familiar sound. The shockwaves of her loss were felt by everyone who knew her, turning a tight-knit community into a collective of mourners. Students, teachers, and residents alike grappled with the reality of such violence, the safety of their world now forever altered. In the immediate aftermath, the school became a focal point for communal grief. Memorial services were held, and counselors were on hand to help students and staff process their emotions. Support systems were rapidly established, offering a space for those affected to come together, talk, and grieve. Classrooms where Ellie had sat, corridors where she had walked, now bore a silent testimony to her absence, a reminder of the fragility of life. The impact on Ellie's family was profound. Her parents, particularly her mother, Carol Gould, were thrust into a reality no parent should ever face. The grief of losing a child was all-consuming, a pain that would never fully heal. Yet, from this unimaginable sorrow, Carol found a new purpose. She turned her grief into action, becoming an advocate for change. Her mission was clear: to prevent other families from experiencing the same heartache. Carol began campaigning for legislative changes concerning domestic homicides, with a particular focus on cases involving young people. Her advocacy was driven by the need to recognize and address the signs of potential violence in teenage relationships, to ensure that such tragedies do not repeat. She pushed for better education on healthy relationships, for laws that would reflect the severity of crimes committed by minors, and for support systems that could intervene before violence escalates. Her campaign, known as Ellie's Law, sought to influence policy at both local and national levels. It aimed at stricter sentencing guidelines, more comprehensive education in schools about domestic violence, and increased awareness among young people about the warning signs of abusive relationships. Carol's work was not just about seeking justice for Ellie, but about creating a legacy from her daughter's life, one that could save others. The community watched as Carol transformed her personal tragedy into a public cause. Her efforts resonated with many, turning Ellie's name into a symbol of both loss and hope for change. Through her advocacy, Ellie's memory continued to inspire, pushing for a society more vigilant, more educated, and more compassionate towards the prevention of domestic violence. The loss of Ellie Gould was a wound on the heart of Calne, but from that wound, efforts for healing and change emerged. Her family's journey through grief to activism highlighted the community's strength in adversity, channeling collective mourning into a collective resolve to make the world a safer place for its young people. The aftermath of Ellie Gould's murder extended far beyond the courtroom, sparking a nationwide conversation about the sentencing of young offenders and the recognition of domestic violence within teenage relationships. It highlighted the critical need for education on these issues, pushing for societal change. Ellie Gould, Ellie's mother, became a pivotal figure in this movement. She launched Ellie's Law, a campaign aimed at advocating for stricter sentencing guidelines, ensuring that young killers are held accountable with sentences that reflect the gravity of their actions. Her efforts were not fruitless. They captured the attention of the public and media alike, leading to a surge in documentaries and articles. These works explored not just Ellie's tragic story, but the broader dangers lurking in seemingly normal teenage relationships. The legal system itself came under scrutiny following the case. There was a growing consensus that the approach to domestic violence and murder, especially when committed by minors or young adults, needed reform. This case underscored the necessity for a deeper understanding and proactive prevention of such crimes. Advocates, including Carol, pushed for changes on multiple fronts. They argued for harsher penalties when sentencing young murderers, suggesting that the law should not be lenient merely because of the perpetrator's youth. There was also a strong call for education, teaching teenagers about the nuances of healthy relationships, the importance of consent, and how to identify abusive behaviors before they escalate into violence. The legal community began to debate the merits of specialized courts or procedures for young offenders, ones that could balance between accountability and the potential for rehabilitation. The need for better support systems for victims and their families was also evident, acknowledging the long-term impact of such crimes on survivors. This case brought to light the systemic shortcomings in addressing youth violence, particularly in domestic contexts. It raised questions about early intervention, the effectiveness of current sentencing guidelines, and how society could prevent such tragedies from recurring. The narrative around Ellie's murder evolved into a broader discourse on how communities, schools, and the legal system could collaborate to safeguard young lives. Through Ellie's Law, Ellie Gould transformed her personal tragedy into a public cause, advocating for changes that could save other lives. While legislative changes are slow, her campaign ignited a movement, leading to increased awareness, policy dialogues, and even minor adjustments in some areas regarding sentencing and educational programs. Ellie's story, while rooted in sorrow, became a catalyst for change, a reminder of the need for vigilance, education, and systemic reform to protect future generations. The legal proceedings against Thomas Griffiths ended with him behind prison walls, yet the narrative of Ellie Gould's life and untimely death continues to resonate. Her family, particularly her mother, Carol, navigates a world irrevocably changed by her absence. They live with a void that time can never fill, their lives forever marked by loss. Meanwhile, the town of Calne, though it heals, carries the scar of this tragedy, a reminder in every quiet moment of the violence that once shattered their peace. Ellie Gould's response to her grief has been transformative. She has channeled her sorrow into advocacy, tirelessly campaigning for legislative changes through Ellie's Law. Her efforts are about more than just seeking justice for Ellie. They're about preventing other families from enduring the same agony. Through her work, she aims to ensure that Ellie's death sparks meaningful change, turning a personal tragedy into a public good, refusing to let her daughter's life be just another statistic. Reflecting on the legal outcomes, the story of Ellie Gould has had both immediate and enduring impacts. For her family, there's the harsh reality of life without her, alongside the bittersweet satisfaction of seeing some form of justice served. For the community, there's a collective mourning, a shared resolve to honor her memory through action. On a broader scale, the case has influenced legal discourse, prompting reviews of how domestic violence and youth crimes are handled. The push for changes in sentencing, education, and prevention strategies speaks to Ellie's lasting influence, her story catalyzing conversations that could lead to safer environments for young people. In the end, Ellie's story is a stark reminder of life's fragility, of how quickly darkness can envelop even the most ordinary of lives. It's a call to vigilance, to better understand the signs of trouble in relationships, to educate, to legislate, and to remember. Her legacy, though born from tragedy, encourages us to look beyond the immediate pain to the potential for change, for betterment, in her name. Join us in remembering Ellie Gould by subscribing to our channel. Help spread awareness about domestic violence and support the fight for justice and change. Click subscribe now.